3:47 a.m. August 3rd, 2026. Broadway Avenue, Muskegon Heights, Michigan. 6 United States Marshals moved toward a 2-story brick building with neon vape signs in the windows. Flash-bang grenades. Breaching ram. Arrest warrant for 1 federal fugitive wanted out of Chicago. What they found inside turned a routine fugitive pickup into a 91-day federal captivity investigation and the rescue of 14 young women. The vape shop had been open for business 11 months. Steady foot traffic. Locals buying disposables, flavored cartridges, glass pipes. A rewards program printed on cheap receipts. The owner knew regulars by name. Nothing about the storefront suggested it was anything other than what it appeared to be. But the Marshals weren't there for vapes. They were there for a man named in a Chicago weapons trafficking indictment who'd been spotted entering the building 3 days earlier. Standard fugitive apprehension. In and out. Except the building had a back room that shouldn't have existed. The warrant was signed April 15th, 2026. The target, Andre Lamont Coulter, 41, last known address Chicago, Illinois. Federal arrest warrant for interstate firearms trafficking. Coulter had been off-grid since February. No phone pings. No credit cards. No family contact. Then a tip came in from an off-duty Michigan State Police trooper. He'd seen Coulter walking into a vape shop on Broadway Avenue in Muskegon Heights. Positive ID from a prior booking photo. The trooper wrote down the address, ran the business registration. Owner, Marcus Webb, 36, Michigan resident, no priors. The U.S. Marshals Service activated a fugitive task force. 6 deputies. Standard protocol. Surveil the location. Confirm the target is inside. Execute the warrant during off hours to minimize civilian risk. They watched the vape shop for 3 days. Coulter never left. Foot traffic in and out during business hours. Customers. Delivery trucks in the alley. But no Coulter. Either he was staying inside or he'd slipped out a way they hadn't covered. On the 4th day, April 18th, they decided to move. Pre-dawn. 4 a.m. Minimal pedestrian traffic. The stack formed outside the front door. Breaching ram ready. Flashbang in hand. At 4:02 a.m., they went in. The front room was exactly what it appeared to be. Glass cases full of vape products. A cash register. Racks of lighters and rolling papers. Behind the counter, a short hallway led to a bathroom and what looked like a storage closet. Upstairs, a small office and a break room. No Coulter. They cleared every room. Nothing. The deputies regrouped in the main retail space. One of them, Deputy Alan Ross, stood near the back wall of the shop and noticed something. The building's exterior was 42 feet deep. He'd measured it on the aerial survey before the breach. But standing inside, the back wall of the retail space was only 36 feet from the front door. 6 feet missing. Ross walked the perimeter. The hallway, the bathroom, the closet. Nothing added up to 6 feet. He knocked on the back wall. Solid. No hollow sound. But when he looked at the baseboard, he saw a floor drain. A commercial-grade floor drain set into the tile, directly against the wall. Floor drains don't sit against walls. They sit in the middle of a room where water collects. Ross called over the lead deputy. They examined the wall. Drywall. Painted. No seams. No door. But the drain was there. And the math didn't work. They brought in a pry bar. Pulled back a section of the baseboard. Behind it, a steel frame. Industrial construction. The wall wasn't drywall on studs. It was drywall over a sealed steel partition. At 4:19 a.m., Ross made a call. This was no longer a fugitive warrant. This was something else. By 5 a.m., the FBI's Detroit field office had agents on site. By 6 a.m., ATF arrived with a rescue saw. At 6:12 a.m., they cut through the false wall. Behind it, a windowless room, approximately 20 feet by 18 feet. Industrial ventilation ductwork running to an exterior vent. Pallets stacked with cardboard boxes. And 14 women, ages 22 to 27, sitting on folding cots against the walls. None of them spoke at first. Medical personnel were called. The women were walked out one at a time under thermal blankets to a mobile triage unit parked at the corner of Getty Street. All 14 were transported to a regional hospital for evaluation. Over the next 6 hours, investigators would piece together what the vape shop had been hiding. The boxes on the pallets contained disposable vape cartridges. 48 pallets. Each pallet held approximately 120 units. 5,760 vapes total. Lab tests conducted later that morning confirmed methamphetamine saturation in the e-liquid. Street-ready product. Pre-packaged for distribution. The ventilation system had been professionally installed. Negative air pressure to prevent odors from escaping into the retail space. The ductwork vented to a rooftop exhaust fan disguised as an HVAC unit. From the outside, the building looked normal. The women had been reported missing over a 3-month span. Most from small towns in Ohio and Indiana. Akron, Fort Wayne, Terre Haute, Muncie. The youngest was 22. A dental assistant from Mansfield, Ohio, reported missing May 9th. The oldest was 27. A pharmacy technician from South Bend, Indiana, reported missing May 14th. Each had been traveling alone when they disappeared. Gas station stops. Rest areas. Parking lots. No witnesses. No surveillance footage that led anywhere. The cases had gone cold. Now they were sitting in a sealed room behind a vape shop in Muskegon Heights. The floor drain Ross had noticed wasn't decorative. It was functional. The room had a water line and a drainage system. Whoever built that space had planned for it to be occupied long-term. Federal agents secured the building and began cataloging evidence. The vape inventory in the front retail space tested clean. The product on the shelves was legitimate. Customers had been buying legal vapes for 11 months without knowing what was 10 feet behind them. 4 men were arrested at the scene. Marcus Webb, the shop owner. 2 employees who worked the counter during business hours. And Andre Coulter, the fugitive from Chicago, found hiding in the upstairs office. None of them talked. The investigation that followed would reveal a distribution network that had been operating since late 2025, moving methamphetamine-laced vapes through Michigan, Ohio, and Indiana under the cover of a legitimate retail business. But the story of how federal agents uncovered it didn't start with the raid. It started 91 days earlier, with a single tip and a task force that was looking for one man. April 15th, 2026. U.S. Marshals Service, Western District of Michigan. Deputy Ross received the fugitive assignment for Andre Coulter. Standard case file. Chicago indictment. Weapons trafficking. Last known associates. Last known locations. Coulter had been careful. No digital footprint. No phone activity. No financial transactions since February. The kind of fugitive who either had help or had gone completely off-grid. Then the tip came in. An off-duty Michigan State Police trooper recognized Coulter at a vape shop in Muskegon Heights. The trooper had worked gang task force in Detroit and knew Coulter's face. Ross ran the shop's business records. Marcus Webb had registered the business in September 2025. Cash purchase of the building. Renovation permits filed in October. Business license approved November 1st. Open to the public November 18th. 11 months in operation. No complaints. No violations. Tax filings current. On paper it was clean. Ross initiated surveillance. Standard protocol. Watch the building. Confirm the target. Plan the entry. But 3 days of watching raised questions. Coulter had been seen entering. He hadn't been seen leaving. The shop had regular hours. 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. Foot traffic steady, but not heavy. Deliveries from wholesale vape distributors twice a week. Everything normal. Except Coulter. Ross reviewed the building layout. 2-story. Retail on the first floor. Office and storage on the second. Alley access in the rear for deliveries. Front entrance on Broadway. One side door, alarmed, emergency exit only. If Coulter was inside, he was staying inside. That suggested either he was hiding upstairs or there was another exit they hadn't identified. On April 18th, Ross made the call to execute the warrant. Pre-dawn entry. Minimize risk. Get Coulter. Close the case. What he found instead was a sealed room and 14 missing women. Forensic accounting later told a different story. The vape shop's monthly revenue based on credit card transactions and sales tax filings averaged $11,000. Industry standard for a small independent vape retailer in a mid-sized Michigan city. But the shop's wholesale purchase orders told another picture. Webb was ordering approximately $40,000 in inventory per month. 4 times what the retail sales could justify. That discrepancy should have triggered an audit. It didn't. The invoices were paid on time. The tax filings matched the reported revenue. No red flags in the state system. The missing inventory was going somewhere. Federal investigators would later trace it to a network of street-level dealers across 3 states, all selling disposable vapes that tested positive for methamphetamine. The vapes were marketed as high-nicotine products. 50-milligram nicotine salt formulations, which are legal and common in the industry. But chemical analysis showed a secondary compound mixed into the e-liquid. Methamphetamine, dissolved and aerosolized. Users inhaled both nicotine and meth with every puff. The street price for a single unit, $60. The cost to produce, including the vape hardware and the methamphetamine, approximately $8. Profit margin, 650%. Over 11 months, the operation had moved an estimated 68,000 units. $4.08 million in revenue. Most of it in cash. The women found in the sealed room had been part of the operation. though the exact nature of their involvement remained unclear. Federal prosecutors later described them as victims of forced labor and captivity. None of them were charged. What investigators did establish: the women had been held in that room since their disappearances in May. The earliest arrival was May 4th. The most recent was July 21st. All of them had been reported missing by family members. All of the cases had been entered into the National Crime Information Center database. None of the missing persons reports had been connected to the vape shop. There was no link, no witness statements, no surveillance footage. The women had vanished, and the trail went cold, until a U.S. Marshal noticed a back wall that was 6 feet too shallow. One question that doesn't have a clean answer: how did 14 women disappear over 3 months without a single lead pointing to Muskegon Heights? The answer, based on what federal investigators pieced together, is logistics. The women weren't taken from Michigan. They were taken from Ohio and Indiana. Small towns, rural areas, gas stations off the interstate. The abductions were spread across 2 states and dozens of jurisdictions. No pattern, no common geography, no reason for a detective in Mansfield, Ohio, to connect a missing person to a vape shop in Muskegon Heights, Michigan. And the shop itself gave no outward sign of what it was hiding. Customers came and went. The business appeared legitimate. Nobody looked twice. But there were tells, small ones, details that, in hindsight, should have raised questions. The building's utility bills, for instance. Electrical usage for the vape shop averaged 940 kilowatt-hours per month for the first 6 months of operation. Standard for a small retail space with lighting, refrigeration for e-liquids, and a point-of-sale system. Then, starting in May 2026, usage jumped to 2,100 kilowatt-hours per month. More than double. Industrial ventilation systems draw significant power. So do HVAC units running 24 hours a day to manage air quality in a sealed room. Nobody at the utility company flagged it. Commercial customers fluctuate. Seasonal changes. New equipment. It wasn't unusual enough to trigger a review. The same pattern showed up in water usage. The building had averaged 200 gallons per month. Bathroom sink, toilet, break room. Then, in May, usage increased to 700 gallons per month. 14 people confined in a sealed room for 3 months use water. For drinking. For basic hygiene. The floor drain Ross found wasn't just for show. It was functional. The room had a water line, a drainage system. Whoever built it had planned for occupancy. The room was professionally constructed. Steel framing, soundproofing, ventilation, drainage, electrical wiring for overhead lighting. It wasn't improvised. It wasn't a last-minute addition. Renovation permits for the building had been filed in October 2025, 1 month before the shop opened. The permits listed interior build-out for retail space, office, and storage. The sealed room wasn't on the floor plan submitted to the city. It was built off-book. No inspections. No official record. Whoever designed it knew how to hide it. Federal agents later identified the contractor who did the work. A Michigan-based construction firm with no prior criminal record. The firm's owner said he'd been hired by Webb to build a secure storage room for high-value inventory. Temperature-controlled. Theft-proof. The owner didn't ask questions. He was paid in cash, $22,000. The contractor had no idea the room would be used for captivity. He thought he was building a vault. That's how these operations stay hidden. People participate without knowing the full picture. A contractor builds a room. A delivery driver drops off pallets. A wholesaler ships inventory. Each transaction looks legitimate in isolation. It's only when you step back and see the whole operation that the pattern becomes clear. And by then, 14 women have been missing for 3 months. On August 3rd, 2026, at 6:12 a.m., ATF agents cut through the false wall with a rescue saw. Sparks. Metal shavings. The saw blade chewed through steel framing and drywall in under 4 minutes. The first agent through was FBI Special Agent Laura Medina. She stepped into the room with a flashlight and a sidearm drawn. What she saw: 14 women on folding cots. Pale. Thin. Silent. Medina holstered her weapon and called for medical personnel. The women were walked out one at a time. Thermal blankets. No restraints. No handcuffs. They were victims, not suspects. Paramedics triaged each woman on site. Vital signs. Hydration status. Visible injuries. All 14 were transported to Mercy Health Hackley campus in Muskegon for full evaluations. Medical records from those exams documented consistent findings across all 14 women: dehydration, malnutrition, muscle atrophy from prolonged confinement, untreated infections. No acute physical injuries, but the clinical picture showed clear deterioration from extended captivity. The youngest woman, the dental assistant from Mansfield, had been missing for 87 days. The oldest, the pharmacy technician from South Bend, had been missing for 81 days. The most recent arrival had been missing for 13 days. None of them spoke to investigators that first day. Trauma specialists were brought in. Social workers. Victim advocates. It would take weeks before any of them gave formal statements, and even then, the details were fragmentary. What emerged from those interviews: the women had been moved to the vape shop under false pretenses. Offers of work. Transportation assistance. Each had been approached differently, but the pattern was the same. A promise of help. A ride to a safe location. Then confinement. Federal prosecutors later described it as a forced labor operation tied to the methamphetamine distribution network. The women were held to package and process the vapes. The work was done inside the sealed room, under supervision, with no contact with the outside world. None of them had been allowed to leave. The room had no windows. One door, locked from the outside. Ventilation kept the air breathable, but there was no natural light. No sense of time. Meals delivered through the door at irregular intervals. The psychological toll of that kind of confinement is difficult to quantify. Some of the women recovered. Others didn't. The long-term outcomes vary. But on August 3rd, at 6:37 a.m., all 14 walked out of that building alive. 4 arrests were made at the scene. Marcus Webb, the shop owner. 2 employees, identified as Kenneth Reyes, 29, and David Harmon, 34. And Andre Coulter, the fugitive from Chicago. All 4 were charged with federal offenses: kidnapping, forced labor, drug trafficking, conspiracy. Webb's arraignment took place August 5th, 2026, in U.S. District Court for the Western District of Michigan. He pleaded not guilty. Bail was denied. The judge cited flight risk and danger to the community. Reyes and Harmon were arraigned the same day. Both pleaded not guilty. Both were held without bail. Coulter, the fugitive, faced additional charges related to his original Chicago indictment: weapons trafficking, interstate transport of firearms. He also pleaded not guilty. The federal indictment, unsealed August 6th, ran to 43 pages. It detailed the operation from its inception in October 2025 through the raid in August 2026. Surveillance logs, financial records, testimony from the 14 women, lab results from the methamphetamine-laced vapes. The indictment alleged that Webb had orchestrated the entire operation. The vape shop was his idea. The sealed room was built under his direction. The distribution network was managed through his contacts. Reyes and Harmon were described as enforcers. They worked the counter during the day, maintaining the appearance of a legitimate business. At night, they supervised the women in the sealed room. Coulter's role was less clear. The indictment suggested he was brought in as muscle, hired to intimidate and control. His fugitive status made him useful, a man with nothing to lose. As of August 7, 2026, all four remain in federal custody awaiting trial. The vape shop operated in plain sight for 11 months. Customers bought legal products at the counter. Deliveries came and went. The business paid its taxes, filed its permits. Nobody looked twice. And 10 feet behind the retail floor, 14 women were held in a sealed room. That proximity is what makes this case hard to process. A customer buying a vape on a Tuesday afternoon had no idea what was happening on the other side of that wall. The disconnect between the storefront and the reality behind it is almost incomprehensible. But that's the strategy. Hide in plain sight. Use legitimacy as cover. Operate within normal business hours. Pay your taxes. Don't draw attention. It works until it doesn't. In this case, it worked for 11 months. Then a U.S. Marshal noticed a 6-foot discrepancy in the building's depth and a floor drain that didn't belong. One detail. One observation. That's all it took to unravel 91 days of captivity. The investigation didn't end with the raid. Federal agents traced the methamphetamine supply chain back to a source in Mexico. Cartel connections. Cross-border smuggling routes. The vapes were just one distribution channel in a larger network. Additional arrests were made in Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois. Street-level dealers. Mid-level distributors. By mid-August, the case had expanded to include 37 defendants across 4 states. The vape shop itself was seized under federal asset forfeiture laws. The building, the inventory, the cash on site, all of it became evidence. The 14 women were placed in protective custody. Federal witness relocation for some. Victim services for all. Counseling, medical care, legal assistance. Their names were never released publicly. Privacy protections for victims of trafficking and forced labor. The court filings refer to them only as Jane Doe 1 through Jane Doe 14. Some of them returned to their families. Others didn't. The trauma of 3 months in a sealed room doesn't resolve quickly. For some, it doesn't resolve at all. But they're alive. And that's because a deputy U.S. Marshal measured a room and noticed the math didn't add up. The system failed these women long before the raid. 14 people disappeared over 3 months. 14 missing persons reports filed in 6 different jurisdictions. 14 families searching for answers. And nobody connected the dots. That's not a failure of effort. It's a failure of infrastructure. Missing persons databases exist, but cross-referencing between states is inconsistent. A detective in Akron doesn't automatically know about a case in Fort Wayne. There's no centralized system flagging patterns. If there had been, someone might have noticed that 14 women between the ages of 22 and 27 vanished from Ohio and Indiana over a 90-day span. That's not random. That's a pattern. But the pattern wasn't visible because the data wasn't centralized. Each case sat in its own jurisdiction. Each family waited for answers that didn't come. It took a fugitive warrant for an unrelated case to bring federal eyes to Muskegon Heights. Without that, the vape shop might still be operating. Luck played a role. A trooper happened to recognize Coulter. A marshal happened to notice a wall discrepancy. Remove either of those variables, and this story ends differently. The trial for Marcus Webb and his co-defendants is scheduled for early 2027. Federal prosecutors are seeking life sentences for all 4 based on the severity of the charges. The defense strategy, based on pre-trial filings, appears to focus on minimizing individual culpability. Webb's attorneys argue he was a mid-level operator, not the mastermind. Reyes and Harmon claim they were employees who didn't know what was happening in the sealed room. Coulter's defense centers on his fugitive status, arguing he was coerced into participation. None of those arguments change what happened. 14 women were held in a sealed room for 3 months. 4 men are charged with making that happen. The evidence is extensive. Surveillance footage, financial records, testimony from the women, physical evidence from the scene. The case is strong, but trials take time. Plea negotiations, motions, delays. Justice moves slowly, and the women who lived through this are still waiting for resolution. Should cases like this trigger automatic cross-state pattern analysis, or is that an overreach into local jurisdiction? There are no easy answers. Federalism means states control their own criminal justice systems. Centralized databases raise privacy concerns. But without better coordination, patterns stay invisible until someone stumbles onto them. The Muskegon Heights case isn't an outlier. It's a symptom of a larger structural gap. And while prosecutors argue over jurisdiction and defense attorneys file motions, 14 women are rebuilding lives that were taken from them for 91 days. The vape shop on Broadway Avenue sits empty now. The windows are dark. The neon signs are off. A federal seizure notice is taped to the front door. Inside, the retail floor looks the same. Glass cases, racks of products, a cash register, everything frozen as it was the morning of the raid. The back wall has been removed entirely. ATF cut it apart as evidence. The sealed room is visible now. Exposed, 20 feet by 18 feet. Folding cots still lined against the walls. The floor drain in the corner. It's a crime scene, preserved for trial. Eventually, it'll be demolished. The building will be sold or torn down. The physical evidence will be gone, but the case will remain. Court records, testimony, evidence logs, the documentation of what happened in that room over 91 days. Federal investigators recovered one additional piece of evidence during the post-raid sweep. A handwritten ledger found in the upstairs office documenting shipments of methamphetamine-laced vapes over an 11-month period. The ledger listed dates, quantities, and destinations. 68,000 units distributed. $4.08 million in revenue. All of it tracked in neat columns on graph paper. Whoever kept that ledger was meticulous. Every transaction recorded. Every shipment accounted for. It was the kind of documentation that makes a prosecutor's job easy. And it was sitting in an unlocked desk drawer when federal agents walked in. Webb kept meticulous records. Either he believed he'd never be caught, or he didn't care. The ledger became Exhibit A in the federal indictment. The case also exposed gaps in wholesale vape distribution oversight. Webb had been ordering $40,000 in inventory per month from a legitimate wholesaler based in Ohio. The wholesaler never questioned why a small retail shop in Muskegon Heights needed that much product. Industry standards don't require wholesalers to audit their customers' sales volume. As long as payments clear and tax filings are current, there's no regulatory trigger. That's a gap. One that allowed 68,000 methamphetamine-laced vapes to move through the supply chain, disguised as legitimate commerce. Federal regulators are reviewing the case now. Possible new oversight requirements for high-volume wholesale purchases. But regulation moves slowly, and the industry resists additional compliance burdens. In the meantime, the model Webb used, hiding illegal product inside a legitimate business, remains viable. The women recovered from the sealed room are scattered now. Some returned to Ohio and Indiana. Others relocated under federal protection. Contact between them is limited. Victim services protocols prioritize individual recovery over group cohesion. But their stories are connected. 14 women who vanished. 14 families who searched. 14 lives disrupted for 91 days because a vape shop on Broadway Avenue was more than it appeared. The floor drain was the tell. A small detail that didn't belong. Deputy Ross saw it because he was paying attention. He asked questions. He didn't accept the surface explanation. Details matter. Discrepancies matter. A 6-foot gap between exterior and interior measurements. A floor drain against a wall. Utility bills that double overnight. Individually, none of those details proves anything. Together, they form a pattern. And patterns, once recognized, can't be ignored. The raid on the vape shop lasted 11 minutes from breach to secure. The investigation that followed has stretched across 6 months and 4 states. The trial will take months more. But the outcome was decided in the first 4 minutes. When Ross noticed the wall. When he called it in. When ATF cut through the steel. Everything after that was procedure. Evidence. Prosecution. The critical moment was recognition. Seeing what didn't fit. Acting on it. 14 women are alive because someone measured a room and trusted the math. The network behind the vape shop extends beyond the 4 men arrested at the scene. Federal investigators identified 7 additional suspects tied to the methamphetamine supply chain. 3 have been apprehended. 4 remain at large. Their names are sealed in ongoing federal warrants. Locations unknown. The investigation continues. The visible part of a case like this gets resolved. Arrests. charges, trials. But the network is larger than what's exposed in a single raid. Somewhere, someone is recalculating, adjusting, finding a new location, a new cover business, a new distribution channel. The demand that created the Muskegon Heights operation still exists. The market for methamphetamine hasn't disappeared. The vulnerabilities that allowed 14 women to vanish without triggering alarms haven't been fixed. This case is closed, but the pressure that created it remains.